Okay, think about the last time you were looking for something specific online.
Mm-hmm.
Imagine if the internet, had a zero organization, no tags, no categories, just this massive jumble of stuff.
Finding anything would be impossible. Just chaos.
Exactly. Now scale that idea way, way up to the whole natural world.
Yeah.
Trillions of organisms, all unique, but, connected somehow. How do scientists even start to make sense of that? All that biodiversity?
Well, that's really the core question, isn't it? That's what biological taxonomy tries to tackle. Welcome to Science Corner, everyone. Today on the Deep Dive, we're jumping into this really fascinating area, biological taxonomic rank and nomenclature.
Right.
You've probably heard terms like kingdom, phylum, species. We all have. But they're not just random labels. They're part of a pretty sophisticated system for classifying and naming everything alive. It's basically the ultimate org chart for life on Earth.
The ultimate org chart. I like that.
Yeah.
And it's definitely not something that just, poof, appeared overnight.
Oh, absolutely not.
It's built up over centuries. Observation, debate, new discoveries. So today, we'll unpack the big steps, from the early days right up to how evolution changed things. We want to give you a clearer picture of why this maybe seemingly technical field is actually so fundamental to biology.
Mm-hmm. And we'll be looking at historical accounts, current scientific thinking, just to give a solid overview.
Yeah, our goal really is to offer you, our intellectually curious listeners, a clear and hopefully engaging introduction to how we map out life's connections.
Okay, so where do we start? I think we have to begin with Carl Linnaeus, mid-18th century. His work, especially Systema Naturae, was just revolutionary for its time.
Revolutionary how? What was the key thing he did?
Well, the really big insight was introducing a hierarchical system, like rungs on a ladder, kingdom, class, order, genus, species. It sounds simple now, maybe, but it imposed this unprecedented structure onto the kind of messy study of nature back then.
Okay, so before Linnaeus, it was more.
What?
Just describing things individually.
Pretty much, or grouping them based on, fairly superficial things, maybe where they lived, or basic appearance. Linnaeus brought consistency. And crucially, he also formalized binomial nomenclature.
Ah, the two-part names.
Exactly, that two-part scientific name, genus and species, like Homo sapiens for us, or vulpes, the red fox. Suddenly, there was a universal language. Didn't matter if you call it a renard or a fuchsias or a fox. Scientists everywhere knew vulpes.
Right, and the specific format, italics, genus capitalized, species lowercase, it feels so standard now. But yeah, a huge step for clear global communication in science.
Absolutely.
But importantly, this was all before Darwin, right? Before evolution was really understood and accepted. How did Darwin's ideas shake up this neat Linnaean system?
Yes. That's the next critical turning point. You see, the dominant view back then, when Linnaeus was working, was that species were fixed, immutable, created as they are and never changing.
Right, static.
Exactly. So the classification system reflected that idea of fixed types. Then, boom, 1859. Darwin publishes On the Origin of Species. And the key insight there is that life isn't static, it evolves. Species change. They're connected by descent. It's a branching tree, not a fixed ladder.
So this idea of rigid, separate boxes, these ranks, it must have started to feel a bit, artificial once you understand everything's connected through shared ancestry.
Precisely. The system based on simple similarity or perceived difference started to clash with this new understanding of evolutionary relationships. People realized, wait, maybe why things are similar matters more than just that they are similar.
And some groups cottoned on fairly quickly. You mentioned the American Ornithologists Union recognized this back in 1886.
They did. The implications of evolution for classification were becoming clear. This paved the way for new thinking. You had figures like Willy Hennig, even back in 1866, suggesting maybe we should rank groups based on how long ago they originated.
Based on their age. Interesting idea.
Yeah, though that specific approach, ranking purely by age, turned out to have practical difficulties. Hennig himself realized that later. But it was a step towards thinking phylogenetically, thinking about evolutionary history. This eventually led to what we now call cladistics, really taking off in the second half of the 20th century.
Okay, cladistics. What's the core idea there?
The core idea of cladistics is classifying organisms based strictly on shared derived characteristics. We call them pseudomorphies.
Pseudomorphies, okay.
These are basically evolutionary innovations, new traits that evolved in a common ancestor and were passed down to its descendants. Finding these shared new traits is the key evidence for grouping organisms together because it points to a shared evolutionary path. It's about genealogy, essentially.
So it's not just any shared trait like having wings. because bats and birds have wings, but they didn't inherit them from a recent common winged ancestor, right? It's about those unique inherited innovations.
Exactly right. You've hit on a key distinction. And then, to really boost this approach, came molecular systematics.
Using DNA and RNA data.
Precisely. Analyzing genetic sequences gives us this incredibly rich, independent data set to figure out evolutionary relationships. Sometimes the physical traits, the phenotype, can be misleading or just not informative enough, especially for microbes or groups that look very similar. DNA often cuts through that ambiguity.
And you mentioned Hennig, the sort of father of cladistics, later cooled on the idea of fixed ranks.
Yes, by 1969, he and others were arguing that maybe we should move away from insisting on these absolute ranks, like class or order. Because evolution is continuous, forcing groups into discrete boxes felt increasingly arbitrary from a purely evolutionary perspective.
Which sort of brings us back to the ranks we actually use today. It seems like a bit of a blend then. The Linnaean structure is still there, but the thinking behind how we group things has shifted massively towards evolution.
That's a good way to put it. The hierarchy itself has even expanded. The 7 main ranks most people learn are domain, kingdom, phylum, or division in botany, class, order, family, genus, and species.
And domain is the newest, highest level, right?
Relatively new, yes. R.T. Moore actually suggested dominion back in '74. But it was really Carl Woese's work in the late 20th, early 21st century that cemented the idea of 3 fundamental domains of life, archaea, bacteria, and eukarya, based on fundamental cellular differences, especially ribosomal RNA. It's now widely accepted as the top tier.
It's interesting, though, how these things take time to get formalized. Even if the science points that way, getting it officially into all the naming rules, the codes, can lag behind.
Absolutely. You see that with domain and kingdom ranks finally being formally incorporated into the prokaryotic code just recently, in 2023. Science moves, and the formal systems adapt, sometimes slowly.
And there are different formal systems, aren't there? Different rule books for naming things.
Yes, that's another layer. We have the International Code of Zoological Nomenclature, the ICZN, or just Zoological Code. The International Code of Nomenclature for Algae, Fungi, and Plants, the ICNAP or Botanical Code. The International Code of Nomenclature of Prokaryotes, ICMP or Prokaryotic Code, and rules for viruses too.
Wow, okay. Why so many different codes?
Well, historically, the study of animals, plants, and microbes developed somewhat independently, with their own traditions and specific challenges. An early attempt to unify rules, at least in zoology, was the Strickland Code back in 1842. But these different codes essentially regulate how names are formed, how they're published, what makes a name valid, and which name has priority if there are conflicts, specifically within their respective domains of life.
And they have specific conventions within them, like the endings of names telling you the rank.
Exactly. In zoology, for example, family names typically end in -idae, like hominidae for great apes. Superfamilies end in oidea. In botany, you see AG for families like Rosaceae for the rose family, and ales for orders like Rosalis. These suffixes provide immediate information about the rank.
And some codes are moving towards italicizing all scientific names, not just genus and species.
Yes, the Botanical Code and the Phylocode, which we should talk about, recommend or require italicizing names at all ranks now for consistency.
Okay, but this brings us back to that issue Hennig raised. If evolution is continuous, how do scientists actually decide if a group is, say, a distinct family versus just a subfamily within another family? It sounds subjective.
It absolutely involves subjectivity. How much difference or dissimilarity warrants a higher rank? There's no objective measure. This is a major critique of rank-based taxonomy, voiced not just by Hennig, but by many modern systematists. And it's the main motivation behind phylogenetic nomenclature, most notably represented by the Phylocode.
The Phylocode. Okay, so what is that and who's behind it?
Key figures involved in developing and advocating for the Phylocode include Kevin de Quiroz, Jacques Gauthier, Philippe Cantino, Michel Laurent, and others. The fundamental idea is to ditch the requirement for obligatory ranks altogether.
No ranks. How does that work?
Instead of defining, say, Mammalia as a class, you define it phylogenetically. For example, you might define it as the crown group originating with the most recent common ancestor of humans and platypuses, and all its descendants. The definition is tied directly to evolutionary history, to a specific ancestor, and its descendants on the tree of life, not to fitting it into a predefined rank box.
So you define the group by its ancestry. That sounds like it mirrors evolutionary reality more closely, less arbitrary boxing.
That's the goal, to make classification a direct reflection of the evolutionary tree. It avoids arguments about whether something deserves to be an order or a class.
Makes sense. But wasn't there an attempt to create one big unified biocode for everything? What happened there?
Ah, yes, the biocode. It was a valiant effort, but ultimately, as one source put it, overcoming the firmly entrenched traditions of zoology, botany, microbiology, it proved too difficult. Each field had its own established rules and inertia, making a single unified code impractical to implement across the board, at least at that time.
Entrenched traditions. A familiar story in science sometimes. So we have the main ranks, the codes, the phylocode debate. But scientists also use other ranks, right? Like intermediate ones.
Oh, definitely. There's a whole host of intermediate ranks: subphylum, superclass, subclass, suborder, superfamily, subfamily, tribe, subtribe, you name it. They can be created as needed to provide finer resolution within the main hierarchy to reflect more detailed relationships.
So it's flexible in that way.
Yes. And there are even unofficial ranks used for convenience. Like species group is commonly used in zoology for a cluster of closely related species within a genus without giving it a formal rank status. People like Alain Dubois have even proposed alternative naming systems for these super-specific levels to try and get around some perceived issues with traditional ranks.
It really highlights that while the ranks give us a structure, a framework, they don't always perfectly capture the fluid, continuous nature of evolution.
Exactly. That's the crux of it. You run into things like the boundary paradox. If evolution is gradual, where exactly do you draw the line between one genus ending and another beginning along an evolutionary lineage? It can be fuzzy.
Yeah, I can see that.
Plus, there's no rule about how many species should be in a family or how old a phylum has to be. A family in insects might contain vastly more species and be much older than a family in mammals, even though they hold the same rank.
So the rank doesn't tell you about species, richness, or age necessarily.
Not in any standardized way across the tree of life, no. The idea of time banding, trying to assign ranks based on when groups diverge, keeps popping up. But as we noted, Hennig found it problematic, and it's still hard to implement consistently. And then you have enigmatic taxa groups where we just don't know their broader relationships yet, making it hard to place them confidently in the higher ranks.
It definitely sounds like a field that's still very much active, still grappling with the best ways to represent life's incredibly complex history.
Absolutely. It's a constant effort to refine the system based on new data and new theoretical insights.
But for those of us just trying to get a handle on the basics, that mnemonics still comes in handy, doesn't it?
Ah, yes, the classic.
King Philip came over for great spaghetti.
Kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species.
Well,
Still a very useful tool for remembering the main sequence.
okay, so wrapping up this deep dive for Science Corner, we've journeyed from Linnaeus setting up the initial framework through Darwin completely changing the underlying philosophy to the rise of phylogenetic thinking, cladistics, molecular data, and these ongoing debates about ranks versus rank-free systems like the phylocode.
We've seen how scientists use this hierarchical system classification and naming to try and organize the sheer diversity of life.
I think a really key takeaway is that understanding these ranks and nomenclature gives us a vital map for seeing the relationships between organisms, even while acknowledging, as you said, that the map itself is constantly being updated and debated as our knowledge grows.
Precisely. The shift towards explicitly incorporating evolutionary history reflects how science works, refining our understanding, making our models better fit reality. The ranks provide structure, but the evolutionary narrative is becoming increasingly central.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? With technologies like advanced genetic sequencing just exploding, how will that continue to reshape our view of the tree of life? Will it further challenge these ranks or maybe even find new ways to support or redefine them? What does the future of classification look like?
That's the exciting part. It's a dynamic field. There's always more to discover and refine.
Well, thank you so much for guiding us through that. It's been really illuminating.
My pleasure. And thank you all for joining us on this exploration of biological taxonomy. We hope it's given you a clearer picture and maybe sparked some curiosity about how we organize and name the living world.
And for all you intellectually curious listeners wanting to explore more, do check out some of the resources on systematics and evolution. We hope you'll join us again next time on Science Corner for another deep dive into the wonders of the natural world.